Welcome to EDUC 640 Balanced Literacy Presentation on Differentiation, Multiple Intelligences, and Understanding by Design. Parts of balanced literacy and best practices connects to differentiation, multiple intelligences, and how you create lessons and units. In this presentation, I will provide ideas and procedures to incorporate this into your teaching situation. Included are also some personal ways that I have used these ideas to improve my practices to best accommodate my learners. Differentiation, how to meet the needs of all learners, exploring where we have been and where we are now. Carol Tomlinson is an expert on differentiation, and these two quotes I have taken from some of the books that I have read from her. In differentiated instruction, teachers begin where students are, not where the curriculum does. Fair is when everyone doesn't necessarily get the same. Fair is when everyone gets what he or she needs. It's basically about providing options and various activities to reach all learners in multiple ways. And I really like that second quote. I've used it with students, not word for word, but when they notice that the student next to them may have a different assessment or they may have a different activity to complete, I always say, fair doesn't mean equal. So-and-so needs this so that he can learn best. This is what you need in order for you to learn best. And typically they are satisfied with that answer. The definition of differentiation is a philosophy that promotes growth and successes by incorporating the growing research on learning, as well as recent research on brain, multiple intelligences, development and authentic assessment, and constructivism. It's not about creating an individual IEP for each student. It's finding out what they need, how they best learn, and providing a multitude of ways to learn and demonstrate their learning. Not every lesson needs to hit all multiple intelligences, but providing enough variety throughout your unit to reach all learners is the essence of differentiation. There are three main learning styles, and I make my students aware of this very early on in the year, that I am, with every unit that I teach, I am trying to support these three main learning styles. So your visual learner learns best by seeing, and that means using colors. I use color as much as possible, having them use highlighters, drawing, types of visualization strategies. In my room, students use highlighter tape to highlight certain pieces of the text that they want to remember or they can connect to, or parts that were confusing for them. My anchor charts are in color. When I do a shared writing of our argument papers, I do it in two different colors to show the different parts of our essay, to show the introduction, the body paragraph, the conclusion. My agenda will often be written on the board in different colors to show the different parts of the class for the day. In their reading portfolio bin, students have particular colored folders to help them remember where to put their work. For my different units, I have different colors coordinated with those as well. My survival and action adventure unit in the beginning of the year, everything is done on brown. Then when I move on to my fantasy and my mythology unit, everything is on purple. And then my social issues unit, my human rights unit, everything in that unit is all done on blue. So that helps them to better recognize what it is they need to do and remember, oh wait, that doesn't go with this unit. Everything is purple this time. And it helps those visual learners. And obviously using videos, pictures, multimedia types of presentations with my visual learners. Auditory verbal learners learn best by hearing or speaking. So that works well with lectures, songs, discussions, debates. Doing a lot of that think, pair, share, conferencing, shared reading and writing think-alouds, student think-alouds, teacher think-alouds, music. All of those are ways to really reach those auditory and visual or verbal learners. Your kinesthetic or tactile learner learns most by doing those hands-on activities, giving them opportunities to manipulate, moving while they're learning. So it could be a skit that they create, a clap routine. Once you're done with your mini lesson, getting up and moving and going anywhere in the room, using the fist to 5 formative assessment, thumbs up, thumbs down, Those types of things help those kinesthetic and tactile learners. Remember our first weekend together? This was one of the graphics that I had shared. Just to kind of keep in mind the types of things that students remember. So students will remember 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see. Overall, they'll remember 50% of what they see and hear, 70% of what they say, and 90% of what they say and do. So something to keep in mind when you're creating your units and you're trying to best reach your students. There are 7 distinct types of multiple intelligences according to Howard Gardner of Harvard University. These intelligences were created after cognitive research was conducted to learn how students' minds work to remember, learn, understand, and perform. Another aspect of balanced literacy in Allington's 6 T's supports the idea of differentiation, since one size doesn't fit all. Multiple intelligences and differentiation can be used in workshop models, as well as utilizing those best practice principles. Many types of surveys can be found on the web to figure out the type of learner a person is according to their multiple intelligence. Don't drive yourself crazy trying to meet all the different intelligence types, but if you can reach students through the 3 main styles mentioned previously, you'll reach the majority. However, when you're creating projects, activities, and assessments with choice involved, try to weave in as much of these different multiple intelligences as you can. Your logical, mathematical learner thinks conceptually. They like to explore patterns, and they want to know the whole before they can focus on the details of the parts. So these learners learn best through logic games, investigations, mysteries. They like puzzles and experiments. Your visual spatial learner thinks in terms of physical space and are very aware of their environment. So they are taught best through drawings, models, graphics, multimedia avenues. Your bodily kinesthetic learner has a keen sense of body awareness, and they learn best through movements. So think about physical activity, hands-on learning, acting things out, doing some role playing for those types of students in your class. Your musical learner has a sensitivity for rhythm and sound. Sometimes these learners study better with music on in the background. You can turn lessons into lyrics, rhyming, tapping along with what you're learning. Your interpersonal student understands through interactions with others. So these are your social students. They learn best with discussions, group work, conferencing, talking things out. Your intrapersonal student is more of that introverted person, where they understand their self the best. They're in tune with their own interests, their own feelings, and their own goals. So these intrapersonal learners are your most independent learners, and they really thrive on those independent study type of activities. Your linguistic students learn through words, using words effectively. These are more of your auditory learners, and they thrive on word games, reading, and writing, anything to do with words. Successful differentiation, the key to that is to really know your students. Use that data. I know that right now data is almost like a swear word in our world. We hear it so many times, and sometimes teachers start to cringe when they hear about data. But use that data to your advantage. Give surveys, whether it be multiple intelligence, their likes, their dislikes, for their interests, discussions, creating that classroom community. Use that data as well as the informative data that you're collecting with your progress monitoring. Know your student differences through that way. The benchmarks, progress monitoring, reading logs, inventories, conferencing, anecdotal notes, observations, exit slips, all those summative, informative assessments, use those assessments and diagnostics to know your students best and know how they learn, where their weaknesses are, and where their strengths are. Try a variety of techniques. You can't always vary it all the time, but make sure that students are getting in it at least more than one way. Don't just stand up and lecture. Make sure that they're accessing that information in more than just one modality. Try to vary the written work. try to incorporate maybe some drawing of responses, giving more choices. And then look at student growth. Use the data to see how students have grown and grasped the concept or skill. Decide if you can extend it, or do you need to repeat it in a different way if they are not quite getting it. So use that data. Be purposeful with it. It's there for a reason to help to drive your instruction. So how can teachers differentiate? There are two different ways to differentiate. You can differentiate based on the skill or knowledge you want students to understand. That critical skill, that concept, that ELO, if you want to, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same focus, but it's delivered and shown in a different way. Think about it as a bullseye. That middle area, the bullseye, is your focus. That's where your critical skill, that concept, knowledge, ELO, your need to know information is in that bullseye. And the rest of the area around that bullseye is the nice to know information. It's an additional information that can connect to that critical skill, but you really want to focus on that critical ELO objective skill knowledge that you want students to come out of the unit or lesson understanding. And that can be done in one of three ways, whether it be the content, process, or product. I'm sorry, it should be the context, yes. So when differentiating for curriculum, there are three areas to focus on. Could be the context. That's the material that you use to help students access the information. Could be the level of material. In my social issues unit, everyone is reading about civil rights in their novels, but the novels are at different levels. It could be using different materials to access information, whether it be accessing information from a picture book or an anthology, or maybe you have one group reading the information from magazine articles and another group looking at the information in graphic novels. In my genre study is a good example of this. Our focus might be on fantasy, but students can choose their own fantasy book as long as it has the basic elements of what fantasy has in it. It stays true to the curricular focus, and they're practicing the same skills, but they're doing it in different materials, in different context. For our ELL student, providing different levels of scaffolding and allowing different reading by controlling it with the same focus as the rest of the group is what's best for those types of readers. Another area is process. This is the one that you have the most control over. It's basically the instructional strategies that you use to teach your lesson or unit and help students access the information. So this can be the different activities that you use to teach the skill or concept. You might vary how you teach the concept or skill over time, because no single method works best for all students. With our ELL learners, it's about varying the methods. When you vary methods for our ELL learners, it gives them the opportunities to practice different speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills. And lastly, you could focus your differentiation on product. And this is their demonstration of knowledge, the end product where they show what they've learned. You can give options like the tic-tac-toe choice boards, or maybe you have independent book contracts. It could be the choice in the questions. For example, with my fantasy genre study, I always have 2 or 3 questions that they can choose from, and whichever one they feel best fits them in their situation with their novel, that's the one that they would answer. You could give them choice in how to create a presentation for research. And for our ELL learners, a written product might be outside their linguistic capabilities, so offering choices accommodates those language proficiency levels. How else can teachers differentiate? You can also differentiate according to what you know about the student. Use that data to drive instruction. Those surveys that you had the students or parents complete, the multiple intelligence data that you have collected. Use that. Know your students. So once you've figured out whether you're going to differentiate based on context, process, or product, you can focus on a student area. You could focus on the readiness, knowing where each of your child is, the depth of where they're learning. You can control the pacing. You can control when you know they're ready to move on. whether the readiness be in their ability, their social readiness, their maturity, their awareness, the background. Those are different ways to think about the readiness. It could be in creating hetero or homogeneous groups for the lesson or unit, having different leveled activities to complete. For our ELL learners, it's about knowing and understanding their linguistic capabilities and content knowledge, and using different assessments, possibly, to reveal what they understand about the content. You could differentiate based on interest, giving them that choice, allowing students to research a topic of their choice, allowing for personal book choice, choosing their own project or product to demonstrate their learning based on their interests. These can create those authentic real-life connections, which in turn becomes highly motivational. When you value student interests and have an expectation for success, you will see those positive results. For an ELL learner, the equation of student interest and high expectations are typically doubled when they can make connections to their homeland, their culture, and their own interests. The last area of differentiating based on students is the learning profile. And this is meeting the students where their strengths lay, using a variety of approaches when teaching, those three main intelligences, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. Match it with the strongest modality in your class or in the group that you may be working with. For your ELL students, the visual support will be probably the number one on the list. Kinesthetic activities also help ELL learners to make strong connections for recall and helps to trigger the brain, making it relevant to their lives. And making it authentic is another way to reach your ELL learners. Keys to success with differentiation is knowing your students, knowing your essential skills, concepts, knowledge, strategies of the mini lesson, making sure that they're evident to your students, that your students know what it is that they should be learning and knowing by the end of the lesson or the unit. Some teachers have the learning outcomes, what the students should know on the board or possibly on the wall or posted somewhere in their room. Myself, I use study bookmarks for the end of the unit assessment. I also have listed on their packet or journals or handouts what the focus is for that unit so that they know these are the things that I'm going to come out of this unit understanding and being able to do. Remember, differentiation is not more or less, but it's about learning differently and also teaching differently. It's the use of essential skills to make sense of and understand key concepts and principles as the focus of learning. So we're going to switch gears here and explain a process of constructing a unit called understanding by design, or sometimes referred to as the backwards design. I also will be giving you some personal examples of how I've gone about and used this type of creation of lessons and units and have found it to be successful in my classroom. So understanding by design is using those essential objectives, ELOs, SLOs, whatever you want to call them, and making sure that they are evident to your students, that they are written in student language so that the students can understand what is expected of them, what they should be learning, and what they should know by the end of the lesson or unit. It's about inclusion, making sure that all students are being able to access that information and learn. It's about accessing prior knowledge, using differentiated instruction, and having meaningful assessments. And what does understanding by design do for teaching? Objectives are known to all learners. Activities and assessments are authentic and provide deeper connections to learning. And because you're working backwards, you get rid of the unnecessary activities, those worksheets, that busy work, and your pacing flows better and planning becomes easier. As you are designing your lesson, continual reflection happens, and you can decide if the activity is actually needed to help students understand, or is it just some busy work? And it's easy to shift gears and change ideas with understanding by design because your focus is very clear. And what has understanding by design done for students? The expectation for the lesson or unit are known and they're expected to meet those objectives. The bar has been raised and the objectives are clear. The focus is on depth, not breadth, and students can come to a deeper understanding of concepts, which then raises their confidence levels. So when you think backwards, you need to think about what is your learning goal? What do you want students to be able to do at the end of the unit? What are the things that students need to do to get there? What are the activities? What do you need to teach them in order to have them achieve the learning goal? And how can you make instruction effective, efficient, and meaningful? How are you going to infuse best practices into your teaching? The first step is to choose your unit. It's best to start with your favorite one. In my example here, I've chose my social issues unit, which focuses on discrimination and the civil rights movement. This is the cover page for my journals, which go along with the reading of their novels. And I differentiate this unit with different leveled books that I match to my readers based on ability and interest. I also have at the bottom of my cover page the objectives for the novel part of the unit, which also will be part of the final assessment. Step 2 is to create several essential questions. So we're thinking 3 to 6 essential questions. So think of the bullseye format. What is that need to know information? No less than 3 ideas and no more than 6. They suggest very nebulous questions, so very general, and you need to keep in mind the developmental level of your learners and scaffolding the essential questions kindergarten through 12th grade. Also keep in the back of your mind when you're creating these essential questions that you want at least 80% of your students to master these essential questions. So for my civil rights unit, my essential questions, number 1, were for them to, my first question, what are some events, people, and vocabulary that are important to the civil rights movement? My second one, what information do students need as background knowledge about the civil rights era to deepen their understanding of the events in their novel? Thirdly, how will they find examples of discrimination and conflict in their novels to understand what the people of that era endured? And then lastly, how would students have dealt with the inequalities from the novels? What kinds of roles would they have played if they lived during this time period? Those were my 4 essential questions that I wanted students to be able to show and understand by the end of the unit. This is my bookmark that I give all students when it comes time to start preparing for the assessment. And here you'll see that my essential questions are written in student-friendly ways for the summative assessment. And this is just the written part of the summative assessment. I also have a project that they complete along with my unit as well, which is a little more abstract. But here they can see the main parts of what will be on that final assessment, and so then they can plan accordingly. The third step is to answer your own essential questions. Define that mastery. So what I knew that they needed in order to answer those essential questions comes from those first 4. I knew that they needed background information. They needed to understand the definitions of ideas that happened during that time period, vocabulary such as discrimination, segregation, demonstrations, integration. I knew that they needed to understand important people and events that took place during that time period. I wanted them to gather examples of discrimination from their novels in 2-column responses where they wrote down what the big events were during that day's reading, and then the second column they completed what their personal reactions would be. That way, that would help them to understand their personal role. They would figure out if they were in the footsteps of those people living during that time area, looking back at their personal responses, they can come to some kind of conclusion of the role that they would play. And by understanding how the different characters dealt with issues in their novels, they can relate that to themselves as well. And students also focused on different types of conflict every other reading day and how the characters in their novel dealt with those types of conflict. The fourth step is to roughly create your summative assessment. And remember, summative is that culminating assessment, the mastery of everything that has been learned in the unit. You can create projects with choice for your different multiple intelligences. I have my written assessment that I laid out earlier, with different parts of my written assessment vary between matching, constructed responses, short essay. But I also, in order to meet the needs of my other intelligences, I had a more abstract project where they could choose to create a t-shirt, a poster, an advertisement, a commercial, all surrounding a quote that they felt encapsulated what happened during that civil rights era. And then the fifth step is to start to work backwards. Think about what knowledge, skills, concepts and learner strategies, vocabulary will the students have to know in order to master your essential outcomes or your essential questions. What concepts does each student need to know? What skills do they need to use? What strategies should they use? For my unit, if you remember back to that cover sheet, my outcomes, my learning objectives for my students were to choose appropriate reading strategies to help them better understand and remember their stories, to analyze and identify social issues and instances of discrimination that were happening in your novel, and then also use personal reactions with those, to make connections between their background knowledge, what they learned beforehand, and what's happening in their novel, to identify and explain text structures and types of conflicts within. So I always start out all of my units with doing some kind of front loading. And here's a jigsaw activity that I have my students work on. We spend about a week front loading the information for this unit. So all this information helps them to activate and build background knowledge. And as I mentioned in class, some students have extensive knowledge on what has happened during the civil rights era, possibly because of conversations at home. It could be the depth that their previous teachers had gone into about the topic, or it could also be from their own personal interests. And in order for my students to be successful, I need to ensure that they're all coming into the novels with the same level of understanding, so that they can think critically about what's happening in their novels and come to deeper conclusions. So therefore, I have different groups researching different events, topics, ideas that happened during the civil rights era. And then they jigsaw those out. The last step is to complete your daily objectives. That's the scaffolding, organizing, planning the day-to-day activities, using student language, creating a statement that expresses the goal for each day. Include those best practices like accessing prior knowledge, looking at student actions, teaching strategies, formative assessments, and specific differentiation. It comes down to what I have them focus on and discuss within their novels, within their partners or their groups. I complete status checks every few days. I have graffiti walls in my room, which are pieces of chart paper where they can comment on their novels and have written conversations with students in different reading classes who are reading the same novel. I read and comment on their reading packet or journals daily to see where their thinking is heading and if they are understanding. I match students with novels which they can access through differentiation. All of these supports happen on a daily or almost daily level. Support is given to the umpteenth percent, and the ultimate result is what the students will end up putting into it in the long run. Thanks for hanging in there. I know it was a long presentation. I hope that you were able to glean some ideas from this information, whether it be differentiation, utilizing multiple intelligences, or thinking differently about how you plan a lesson or unit. All of these are ideas that you can implement in order to use best practices in your teaching.